The most effective online courses are designed by instructional designers and SMEs who are on the same page. When these two parties both feel that they have an equal voice in the conversation and a partnership is established, the best possible learning experience is achieved. It is worth emphasizing the use of the word equal. If you successfully establish boundaries and guidelines, the project will run smoothly. Having tension in the project because of the SME or the faculty member being disengaged or not believing that an online course can be an effective teaching method will lead to chaos. And while most instructional design courses will teach about designing curricula, utilizing theories, and applying concepts, the topic of collaborating with SMEs doesn't receive as much attention. That's why I've teamed up with EduFlow, and we're making a new course called Collaborating and Building Relationships with SMEs. The course will be launching pretty soon, so sign up today and get notified of course updates by going to eduflow.com/academy or click on the link in the show notes below. And now, let's start the show. Hey folks, and welcome on into the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer and program manager at MIT, and I'm the author of the book to help you make the transition into the instructional design field called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. My passion is instructional design, and I consider it my purpose to help you make the online learning experience incredible, not just for your students, but also for you, and to help you with guidance along the path of your career. And you can find my book, courses, YouTube podcasts, and everything else that I do over at drlukehobson.com. We all have to start somewhere. No one hits the ground running and doesn't have a few hiccups along the way. I was sharing something recently about how one of my YouTube videos hit 10,000 views, and I was astonished. While the content was good, it was by far my worst produced video I've ever done. There was zero editing, awful lighting, no animations, no introduction music, and an overkill of PowerPoint slides. But still, people connected with the content. And I use this as a teachable moment to share about how you just need to take that first baby step and start. Because who knows what that's going to lead to if you stick with it long enough. I've found that the more that I share these tips with you, the more it motivates and inspires you. So I thought about it and was like, what could I share from my past that will help this week? And then it hit me. What if I talked about my 3 biggest mistakes as an instructional designer? I am far from perfect, and trust me, my career started off quite rocky. It was not smooth sailing, and I questioned if this was the path for me entirely after a few of these mistakes. I wrote down my top 3 blunders, and I coupled them with life lessons to help you on your instructional design journey. So let's get this started. Number 1. Not showing the value of instructional design. Connie Malamed from the e-learning coach recently wrote a review for my new instructional design book. We were chatting back and forth via email about it, and she asked me a great question. When I wrote about how I introduced myself as an instructional designer, one of my lines is that I say I understand how people learn online. And she wanted to know why I specifically state the word online, when in reality, it doesn't matter the setting or the delivery. Instructional designers know about learning. It's the core function of our job. At first, I didn't have an answer. I'm sure there was a reason why I always mentioned online, but it took a bit of effort to go and figure out why. It wasn't until I met up for dinner with my former supervisor and she was explaining about a situation with a very difficult person to work with. Her story triggered an early memory, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's why I say online in my introductions. When I was starting off as an instructional designer, I wasn't confident in my abilities. And that gave the impression to SMEs, or as we call them, subject matter experts. I always say SMEs. That's just a habit I picked up over the years. But anyway, the impression that I gave to SMEs, since I wasn't confident, is that I didn't know what I was talking about. Given that my SMEs were well known professors and deans, they challenged me on everything, and I can't really blame them. Having some 20-year-old say that he's the expert on learning when they've been teaching for 40 years was a recipe for disaster. I was trying to find a way to give me an edge. Most of my SMEs never even heard of instructional design before, and now they think someone is put on a project to undermine them. So, what on earth could I say to show my value? The answer was the online learning piece. Thinking back to the SMEs I worked with at the start of my career, they weren't the online experts. Using Blackboard to them was a mystery, and past attempts of them trying to put their course into an online version wasn't received very well by their students. So I took a different approach, and I began to say that I understand how people learn online. And apparently, I never looked back, as I still say this today. However, this difficult start crushed my confidence at first. I don't enjoy butting heads with people, let alone when I feel like I'm at an extreme disadvantage. I was too inexperienced to push back with SMEs because I couldn't think of the counterpoints. I didn't know. Of course, this didn't showcase the value of an instructional designer. I was there as more of a course organizer rather than a contributor. My big mistake here, though, was assuming that SMEs didn't want feedback. An unfortunate circumstance was that my first SME wanted to fight about everything. But the second SME I worked with changed my perspective on feedback altogether. One evening, we were working on a course mapping activity together. And for those of you who have never done course mapping before, this is when you break down every component of what learners will be experiencing in the course. You'll actually map out what goes where until you have a completed overview. I'm also simplifying this by 1,000, but that's the general gist of what course mapping is. I was working with this SME on this activity, and I was following my usual routine of saying that, everything looked great and not really pushing back. And truthfully, he was actually doing great with this activity. But then he asked me if I had an idea for an activity he was stuck on. It was the first time that someone asked me for my opinion, and I didn't give it a second thought to chime in with an answer. With having my opinion valued, I used this momentum to speak up about more and other parts of the design. This exact instance happened on another project too, but it was even more apparent that the SME wanted feedback. The SME and I were filming in Boston, and after his first couple of takes, I realized that he had a fear of being recorded. He didn't outright say it, but the second the red flashing light was visible on the camera, he froze up. He fumbled over easy words and just looked nervous. He asked how the recordings were going, and I just gave him that casual thumbs up. After the third take or so, he said, "Luke, I need more feedback. If it's good, tell me why. If it's not, tell me how I can improve." I paused and had to give some thought on how do I coach someone to not be afraid on camera. I've never done that before. We took a break for a bit, and I mentioned how I was learning so much about the content from sitting in on the recording sessions. He then began to passionately speak about the subject matter and even made a few of us on the crew do some role-playing activities to reinforce his points. He stopped thinking about recording altogether, and he started to think about teaching. The minute he was done, the crew and I looked at each other and knew that he needed to speak in this manner on camera. I gently suggested for him to think about the camera as being another person on our camera crew. Talk to the camera the way you just talked to us. And after he did that, he was like a different person altogether. The nerves went away, and it was an awesome recording session. Once he finished his last take, he looked at me, smiled, and he said, "Why didn't you explain it to me like this before?" And I laughed and thought to myself, well, no one has ever asked me for point blank feedback. No one had ever made me feel like the expert until that moment. I will say thank God for this SME because he was the one who I needed at that point in time. My initial fear of SMEs not considering feedback went away, and over the years, I learned how to be more strategic with how I approach feedback completely. Years ago, I could barely mutter a few words on how instructional designers are valuable on a project. And now, you can't make me shut up about our value and what we can bring to the table. My next mistake was overthinking literally everything. When I say everything, I truly mean everything. What if I used the wrong word on a rubric? What if I said define, but I meant explain? The students will despise the course because the learning outcomes don't make sense. Even the faculty members will never work with my department again because the students are going to complain, and I am going to be the reason for why the online division and the on-campus faculty hate each other. Yeah, so welcome to my brain as a new instructional designer. This kind of extreme overthinking is simply not true. Instructional designers aren't on the battlefield. We don't work in healthcare. We don't work in life or death situations. And I promise that no one is going to perish because your rubric isn't perfect. Try telling that to the me from years ago, and of course, I wouldn't believe you. When I first started, it never really clicked with how much academic freedom there is in instructional design. I had a few examples of finished courses, rubrics, and blueprints, and I tried replicating them, but it never made complete sense to me. I had this idea that courses had to be perfect. The problem for me was that there wasn't a guide to follow on how to make a perfect course. I didn't understand how two instructional designers could be assigned to both work on an IT course and then design completely different experiences. The outcomes, objectives, and rubrics were developed in the same manner, but the assessments, activities, and the content, well, they could be completely different. As someone who was just trying to wrap his head around this process, it made me overthink absolutely everything. It wasn't until I had experience of designing a few different courses that I understood more about how instructional designers think. Instructional design is a combination of creativity and learning sciences. If one SME wants the final project to be a team-based presentation and the other SME wants it to be a summative assessment with using a simulation, neither of them are wrong. As long as we are aligned to the goals and the assessments lead to the same conclusion, the delivery method can be vastly different. There is an art and flexibility to how courses are designed, and as a newbie, I couldn't wrap my head around this at all. The funniest thing about all of this is that now I fully acknowledge that I won't get my courses right in the first try, and I need to incorporate student voice into the equation. I need feedback from students to understand exactly how, when, where, and why I can make improvements to the online learning experience. I'm not the target audience. I will never understand where they are coming from and their backgrounds and their experiences, and I need to listen to their perspectives. While the former Luke would stress out about launching a course to the world that wasn't perfect, the current Luke is excited to hear about the feedback from pilot programs to make the learning experience better each time. It's something that I truly do love and enjoy about my job. And then number 3, folks, is not believing in the power of I'll figure it out. Without a doubt, the best instructional designers that I've met all share one ability. If they face a challenge that they've never encountered before, they say, I'll figure it out. 4 little words that hold so much power, but encompasses a well-known feeling in our field. If we don't have the answers, we can find them. When I first started to work as an instructional designer, I was asked a ton of questions. Many people never heard of instructional design before, so naturally, they had several questions on the entire design process. As a newbie, I found myself saying many, many times that I didn't know. I felt rather foolish and naive because I should know the answers, but I was never exposed to them. I ended up developing a bad habit of relying so much on my supervisor that I began to feel annoying. Every time someone asked me a question, it's like I forgot how to critically think. I immediately went to her with every single question, and instead of trying to solve the problem on my own, I just kept on asking her time and time again. And after I found myself doing this for like the 5th time in a row one day, I took a deep breath and thought to myself, what would I do if she wasn't available to answer my questions? Let's say, hypothetically, she goes on vacation, she's on a retreat, or she's in a meeting. What would I do? This kind of thinking shifted my mentality to say that I don't have the answers, but I can find them. Someone, somewhere, must have the answers I'm looking for, and I just need to find that person to help me. I had to put this theory to the test, though. I was working on a project and I had a question about Blackboard. And I've mentioned Blackboard now twice in this episode. So, for those of you who don't know what that is, it is a very popular learning management system. And I think it was even more popular back in the day, where now you probably know about Canvas and maybe you haven't heard of Blackboard before. But at the time, I was using an older version and I felt like I was basically a member on a bomb squad where if I cut the wrong wire, the course was going to explode. Blackboard had this super awesome tendency with formatting where if I pushed the wrong button, everything looked different, and I don't know why. Think of how you try to resize an image in Word and then everything shifts incorrectly. It's like that, but on a much, much bigger scale. So here I was, trying to build this new course on a system that I didn't understand, and boy, did I need help. Instead of immediately pinging my supervisor, I went over and I introduced myself to the LMS administrator, and I asked if I could borrow a few minutes of her time. Sure enough, she knew the answer. And then I began to practice this a bit more. If I didn't have the answer, I would go find someone within the building or on Slack who could help me. Before long, I had a new mentality, and it was that I'll figure it out. Through trial and error and networking, I managed to solve any problem that I face. I used to hate admitting that I didn't have the answers because I wanted to be viewed as the expert. But after some time, it felt right to be more transparent. It felt far more right to be genuine and to say to a SME that, hey, that's a fantastic question and no one has ever asked me that before. Let me look into this for you and I'll reach back out. The SMEs have always been satisfied with that answer because, of course, you're going to go and find the answer. And then naturally, you buy yourself some extra time to be able to go and figure it out. I have built on this mentality for everything I have done in my career. I don't have all the answers, but I can figure it out. Even take this podcast as an example. Do you think I knew how to make a podcast a few years ago? No, I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what an RSS feed was. I didn't know what microphone to buy or how to edit in GarageBand. However, someone out there had to know how to do these things. I found that person in one of my friends who had a podcast. And by talking with him, he told me what microphone he used, and he then shared with me what YouTube video that he followed as a step-by-step guide for making sure that you do everything right with an RSS feed. And all of a sudden, before you knew it, I had a podcast. And then I did the same thing with my YouTube channel, the same thing with writing my book, and the same thing with starting Instructional Design Institute. The answers are out there. You just need to connect with the right people, find the right resources, and then you'll be able to figure it out. So what are my main lessons that I want you to know? The first is you need to be able to explain the value of an instructional designer and what this person can bring to a project. Don't assume that everyone knows what you do and how it can benefit them. If you are in a position like me where you work with well-respected professors, you need to find the right wording to help them visualize what you'll do to make the learning experience better compared to someone doing this on their own. If you work in corporate, you may face the opposite problem of people knowing that you are the expert, but don't understand why you need to put in so much time, energy, and effort into a training. Learning is a process of change. It doesn't happen in a 20-minute session with some interactive materials. You need real research, proof, and ROI, and that is going to be shown to them to make other people end up seeing the light. The second lesson is that overthinking will cripple you. There isn't a magical way to flip a switch and to stop overthinking, but over time, slow and steady steps can be taken to help ease your mind. For me, I assumed that every single detail was being scrutinized by everyone at all times, when in reality, no one was blaming me for using an incorrect word or a small mistake. By far, I was my toughest critic. I want you to start thinking about embracing and welcoming student feedback and student voice. This will only help you to grow as an instructional designer. And my last lesson is to give yourself more credit. You're a smart person. If you couldn't find an answer to a problem under any other normal circumstance, you would figure it out. You wouldn't say, oh, woe is me, and then give up entirely. And instructional design isn't any different. Try to figure things out on your own through trial and error. If that doesn't work, reach out to your network for help. If that doesn't work, join one of the several instructional design communities on Facebook or LinkedIn. Pay it forward and help out others, and you'll eventually learn to just figure it out. Well, that is all I have for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're listening in real time, have a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving. If you're listening to this in the future, then I hope you had a great holiday. If you are thinking of gift ideas, because holidays are right around the corner for the learning nerds in your life, pick up a copy of my book on Amazon, or you can find the ebook version at theinstructionaldesignbook.com, or for anything else over at drlukehobson.com. Give this podcast a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. And as always, stay nerdy out there. I'll talk to you next time.